This episode is made possible by our generous patrons.
Welcome to episode 117 of the Ink to Film podcast, where we read the book
and then see the movie.
I'm Luke.
And I'm James.
And this week, with the help of special guest Jessie Kwak, we discuss episodes 6 through 10 of season 1 of The Expanse. So let's introduce our guest this week. Jessie Kwak is the author of the supernatural thriller From Earth and Bone, the Durga System series of gangster sci-fi novels, and the productivity guide From Chaos to Creativity. Welcome aboard, Jessie.
Thanks for having me. This is fun.
Aboard really fits with this project, right? We're jumping on.
Right, yeah. I think I threw everybody a curveball with that, but that was my goal.
Come aboard.
So, Jessie, we have been covering The Expanse now for 2 episodes. We did Leviathan Wakes and the first 5 episodes, and you told me you have listened to at least some of our coverage so far, and I wanted to give you this chance to come in and tell us about your relationship with The Expanse. Whether or not we're full of shit, if you want to talk about that, you can. But just basically, when did you first see the show? When did you first read the books? And are they important to you?
Well, my husband brought home Leviathan Wakes. I don't know. It was maybe like the year it came out, or like pretty soon thereafter. And he was like, "This looks like the kind of book you're gonna love," and he was absolutely 100% right. So, We both got into reading him really early. He eventually kind of started wandering off and reading other things, and I kept going with the series. And of course, once the the TV show came out, it was like, oh my gosh, we got to watch this. So it's been really fun revisiting those earlier books and earlier TV shows. I've only read through book 4, so I'm not as far along, but if I had more time to read, I definitely would be, because I do love the series. I've really been enjoying your guys' coverage as well. I have to say, when you guys started talking about the characters in the series as opposed to the books, and you were talking about Holden and his annoying pout and how obnoxious he was, and I ran into the other room and was like, Rob, they're spot on. Holden is so obnoxious in the series.
That was, I felt like a controversial opinion when I said it. I was like, I don't know how this is going to fly, but I'm glad to hear that it held up.
In the book, I pictured him as older and a little bit more mature, and so the casting really surprised me. So I'm used to him now, and so rewatching it, I'm like, okay, I don't find him nearly as annoying, but oh man, the first time I was just like, who is this guy?
I do feel like with this half, the second half that we've gotten, there's a little bit less. I think it was an intentional thing. I think they were purposely making him seem a little more immature. But I will say there was still pouting all over the place. So
yeah, I agree. Though I think in these episodes he improved his standing in my eyes. It's not that he moved away from that. It was more like we got some more information about him. It seemed like he was kind of embracing some of that side of himself and not maybe being as full of himself as he was being in the early episodes, which made him kind of vulnerable in a way that I liked. We'll get into that in this specific episode that I'm thinking of where it really started to turn for me. But yeah, I do like Holden in the show. I don't want to seem like I don't. I do. He's just taking a little longer to win me over in the show than he did in the book.
Yeah, I would agree with that assessment.
Yeah, it's something about the show seems like you're gonna be on board with the characters faster because there's so much character building going on. I would say in comparison to the first half of the book, but with Holden, it's just it's taken some time, and I don't know. By the end, I can kind of see where the arc will go, and maybe if he 1 or 2 less pouts next season, and then 1 or 2 less beyond that, maybe we'll start to take him really seriously.
I mean, he does have a very pretty pout. We have to give him props for that.
He's aware of it.
Yeah, exactly. I don't fault him for being I'm just gonna use this moment to really show off my dashing good looks.
So I wanted to ask you, Jessie, I know you write a series of gangster sci-fi novels in space, and I had to think that if you've read this series and you're writing those kind of books, there has to be some influence there, right? Does this work influence your writing?
Oh, absolutely. I think a lot of the kind of politics, especially the kind of interplanetary, international politics, that's something that I was really drawn to in this series. Definitely the class conflict and the kind of haves versus have-nots conflict, the sort of colonizers and the people who have been colonized. Like, there's a lot of that I find I already have in a lot of my work, and so I resonated a lot and drew a lot from that. And my series is also set in a single solar system, so there's not like crazy interstellar space travel. It's just all very like this small, compact, we're all in this together. So it's like one fragile ecosystem, don't screw this up, guys, sort of feel that you also get from The Expanse.
So is it safe to say that fans of The Expanse should check out your books?
I would say so. Especially if you like the kind of plucky space crews working together. There's way less space travel in my books, but the plucky crew working together.
It's cool. I was, coming into The Expanse, I guess I just wasn't aware. I hadn't talked to many people about the specifics, but I was expecting kind of this like huge plethora of characters and traveling from different galaxies in and out. But this sort of small scale thing really works for me because I feel like it's this step before we get to that. Like if society and our solar system in general can just coexist for a little bit longer, maybe the tech will get there. And it seems like maybe these Mormons are on a mission to see what they can do to further help the human race and see how far they can take it. But who knows if that's a fool's journey or not?
Right. I also, one of the things I really love about The Expanse is how you see this big inner solar system fight and politics, but it's told from like really individual stories and it's very personal. Because that's something that I think throws me out of a lot of other series, just kind of this where you're really only seeing the big political machinations and not the story of the everyday person who's being affected by these bigger political decisions. So I appreciate that they give us kind of that wider view of everything from the politics all the way at the top, especially in the series throwing in Avasarala, and getting that perspective, and then, the little guy on the bottom who's just trying to make his living.
I like that some of the show decided to give us even more of that. There's sort of like these little snapshots in certain episodes of like, the father and daughter who were on that civilian ship that were just protesting their living conditions, things like that. That sort of small scale story that isn't even necessarily as large as the overarching story of somebody like Holden or Miller.
I wanted to point out you were talking about the size of this series, and I think having it be in our solar system gives a certain familiarity. Like, we all know kind of where things are if you've studied like any astronomy at all. You have like a rough idea of where Mars is, where the asteroid belt is, so on and so forth. And so even though we are on these like much larger than Earth scales, it's not so big like a Star Trek or something, or even Battlestar Galactica, where you start to sort of just go, yeah, they're in space, and anything could be anywhere. They might come upon something, who knows? Whereas here, it's like they have to play it a little more straight, because it's like these are places we're all familiar with, and they have certain distances from each other, and they have a certain relationship to each other and a certain makeup. And so it holds them to a certain level of truth that I find really fascinating, and I'm really liking about the series so far.
There's also a certain level of consequences that I think and stakes that are a little bit higher. Like, in Star Wars, you can blow up a planet and you're like, oh shit, that sucks. But like, if they blew up Earth or Mars, like, you're just like, oh my God, that's one of the 2 habitable planets right here. Like, we don't have other ones, guys.
So Jessie, I wanted to ask you, as someone who, clearly Luke and I have just finished the series for the first time and haven't even finished the book, but as somebody who's read some of the books, I wanted to know how much of the show you've seen. And we're doing this coverage in anticipation of season 4 that's been saved by Amazon. I'm just wondering, like, the excitement level for you, or where are you at with that?
So, because I started watching the show with my husband, I can't keep going ahead without him, and our schedules haven't been lining up for a while. He's a sales guy; he travels for work a lot, and I travel for work a lot. So, I realized, got knocked off somewhere in season 3. So we haven't finished season 3. Okay. But now that season 4 is coming out, I'm like, we we need to make the time here. Maybe we'll binge it over the holidays when he doesn't have to travel so much. But yeah, I'm very excited for season 4.
Yeah, I was going to tell you, James. I think we're going to have to make an executive decision here, and that we're just gonna watch this thing, because I don't want to wait and maybe do a season 2 in a year or something. Like, I think we're just gonna have to go through it. This is going to be our Expanse coverage, so savor it while you got it, because we probably won't be covering unless we like one day return for season 5 or something. But yeah, right. For now, I think this is going to be it, and we're just going to watch/read, because I actually really want to read the books too. I've been enjoying that a lot as well. So, yeah. All right. So, are we ready, James, to move into our episode by episode discussion?
Yeah, let's do it. So, episode 6 is called Rock Bottom. In this episode, Miller discovers revealing information on a hidden data cube. Holden and crew arrive at Tycho Station, surprised by their host's hidden agenda.
I want to talk about that right off the bat. Them arriving at Tycho Station and meeting Fred Johnson for the first time in person. I thought there was a ton of pointless posturing going on here. It was like they had this like showdown in a hallway where they're pointing guns at each other, and I was like, "What is the point of this? Like, you've already agreed to everything that's happening right now. You've docked and boarded. Now you're gonna like pull guns on each other and have this weird posturing thing." I guess they're trying to show that they are distrustful of him, but it seemed a little weird to me. I don't know. How'd that scene strike you guys?
Yeah, I agree with that. And I'm trying to remember in the book if there was as much posturing, or has that even happened in the book yet where you guys have gotten
I don't think there was. I think they kind of were like, they were like, well, we're going to go there and we're just going to have to see what he does. And then once they decided to do that, they just kind of stuck with that decision, which is what I was frustrated when they decided to do the same thing. But then they got there and were like, oh, I don't know about this, and decided to have this weird showdown in the hallway. I don't know. It just didn't make sense to me.
I notice Amos a lot has these moments where he just gets to hold a gun and potentially shoot it at someone in a potential situation.
That's a silver lining, because I'm starting to love those moments.
Yeah,
personally.
So that happens a lot. So maybe it's one of those moments.
I think they're trying to sow distrust with because I think right now we're still unsure if he has something to do with everything else that's going on, right? Like, is he secretly the bad guy? And I think they're playing with that idea.
There's this interesting moment, though, where they're like, we're going to go back to our ship. And he's like, no, you're not. Like, they're not like, what? Why can't they go back to their ship? Like, are you guys on the same side or not? Yeah,
I'm telling you, man, it was a bunch of this like weird posturing. And then it kind of just goes away. Like, they kind of just like come to an agreement. They're like, okay, I guess we're going to stop doing this and we're fine now. Right?
Does that have something to do with the fact that Fred found that thing on the Martian? Like, he went down below in their ship or whatever and found the data that eventually he revealed to the world?
Well, because in the book, doesn't Holden find that? Or doesn't the Martian give that to Holden?
I don't remember it happening that way in the book.
I don't remember, yeah.
Yeah, because I don't remember... I don't remember Fred Johnson finding that. I thought it was something. No,
I think that was a show edition, maybe.
Because I guess we also wouldn't have been able to see it if Fred Johnson had found it, because we don't have his point of view.
Yeah, so maybe he did, and we just don't know about it. That's possible. Maybe it'll be revealed in the second half of the book, which we're going to cover next week, we should say. So for anybody who's curious about that, we'll be returning to the book. But anyway, so in general, though, what do you think of Fred Johnson in the show? What do we think of Tycho Station and how it all looks with the big Mormon ship under construction and everything?
Visually, it's a really fun set. Like, it's grand. I like the Mormon ship, and kind of the big sweeping views of it is really fun.
Yeah, I mentioned in our last episode on the show how I felt like you could really see the sci-fi nature of the show, like the lower budget and the CG and stuff. But
when you say sci-fi, you mean Sci-Fi Channel. Maybe we should
Sci-Fi Channel. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Sometimes it sounds
Sci-Fi
like you're
Channel.
just saying sci-fi the genre.
No.
What you mean?
Yeah. That's not what I mean. Yeah. So no, Sci-Fi Channel, budget and for this time period. But I will say, like, I think I started to see that less and less as the second half went on. A couple of moments here and there, but like you talked about the turn and burn kind of flipping and they use that a lot in this show. But there are a couple moments like when at the kind of a spoiler for the end of the show, but when they're breaking out at the end and they drop the sort of gas freighter stuff and they're doing this like super cool Rocinante moment where they're like, look at our ship and how cool the Mars, like cool gadgets and everything. I think it actually works really well for a lot of it. And I think those moments like kind of separate the show from a lot of other sci-fi, because it's this, because I feel like like in general, there's some sci-fi that's like, I would say like Star Trek is for the more analytical sci-fi fan, or someone who's more in for a very specific tone, whereas this is clearly trying to be a little more broadly appealing, but it's also, I don't know, it's nice because it almost feels a little lighter in a way.
I do think it's an interesting mashup of genres, right? Like we're getting the Western feel of these characters. We're getting the hard-boiled detective. We're getting action, but we're also getting like politic, and we're getting a bit of that kind of Battlestar Galactica or Star Trek vibe too. And it's all coming together. And in general, I think it works really well. Not to mention that we got like a bizarre disease that is really behaving in ways that I was not expecting. I guess it's called the protomolecule. We heard the first time the name of it here, which I assume, Jesse, you know more about. So I'm going to ask you not to reveal anything beyond these episodes, just so we can maintain our spoiler-free nature.
Speaking of things that you might know, I wanted to ask you with Chrisjen. We talked about in one of the episodes, I thought maybe that this character was just a show character, but I saw something online that made me think that she wasn't. So I wanted to ask you if is she in the first book and we just haven't gotten to it yet, or is she in later books?
She's in later books. She shows up in book 2. And
Okay.
I've been trying to remember from reading book 2 if we're seeing any of plot points that happen in book 2 in her storyline, or if this is all just kind of new stuff that was made for the show. And I can't quite remember. But yeah, she's very pivotal in book 2.
Yeah, that was my next question is sort of, does any of this happen? Does it just happen out of sequence? Because some of the things that she's doing is directly impacting, well, I guess eventually will, but like her meeting one of Holden's parents, and just certain things along the way that feel like it would potentially make waves for the characters in the show later.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that's not in this episode, though, so I want to wait to talk about that, because I do have some observations. Before we leave Tycho Station, there's a moment where there are people on the outside. I think they're on the outside of the Rocinante, but I'm not 100% positive. It might have been somewhere else. But at one point, the guy just opens his mask when he's in the vacuum of space, and he breathes for a second, and he watches the air kind of come out, and then he puts it back down. And I was so like, what was the point of that? It was so bizarre.
I thought we were going to find out that this guy was like infected with the disease or something. I honestly started to think like maybe this disease, this like molecule thing, because I started just kind of crafting theories and trying to figure out what it could be. And I thought maybe this could be a situation where it was like some sort of organism that had a mind of its own. And if it like latched onto somebody, it would like find a host and then manipulate them. And I was like, oh, this person can open their mask because they're like not living any longer. And it's this sort of molecule thing that's taken over.
Yeah, it was kind of a weird moment.
Yeah, it's like they're trying to show that, because I have heard that a lot of Hollywood movies have overblown how quickly you will die in space. Like that it's not as fast as like a lot of the older movies where people's eyes are exploding and stuff. Like it's not that fast and that dramatic. It is, but it's extremely cold, and it would be extremely unpleasant. So you would not choose to do it just willy-nilly. Even if you could survive it, you wouldn't be like, oh, I'm just going to like throw open the hatch for a second and feel the icy cold of space. Or if
unless you're a
the sun,
badass
it's probably
belter.
like super hot or something. Yeah, well, maybe. And maybe that's the answer. But it was just like some random guy, though. You know what I mean? Like it wasn't even like character building. It was very bizarre. Anyway, we don't have to spend any more time on it.
Well, he pulls something out of his helmet. Like he opens the latch and like pulls something out.
Oh, you're right. That's what it was. He was like clearing
Yeah.
something from his mask. That's what it was.
Yeah. Which was weird in the first place because like I remember I was watching with my girlfriend and she was like, "What is that? Was that a worm that he just pulled out? Like what, he's just pulling something out of his mask?"
Yeah, it was a bizarre moment. I don't know why they included it in the show, but we can move on.
All right. I want to talk about Holden and Naomi, because I think in this episode it starts to become a thing, and I was like starting to think, are they going to try to do some sort of romance here? I feel like they're going to create some tension between the two, and then never have it go anywhere. But it seems to me by the end of this season, like they are trying to gear something up with the relationship there, which I don't know how to feel about, and I don't know if it's a book thing or just a show thing, or
he definitely has feelings for her in the book, but they seem more shallow to me. Whereas this maybe seems like more organic, like it's actually developing.
I thought that in the book he just mentioned like she was attractive and that kind of thing.
That's what I mean. Like
Yeah.
I remember it was also very quickly after Ade had died, he was already thinking about like what it would be like to be with Naomi, and I was like, this is kind of weird. So it just never quite sat with me the right way. Whereas I actually think the show is showing their relationship develop more organically, which I actually got to give props to the show for, because I kind of like that.
I don't know. There's something about just like not having a love relationship between a male character and a female character in a show like that. You know what I mean? I would just like.
Well, I should say that I don't necessarily mean I think they're going to get together and it's going to be rosy, but I also think that there can be a romantic tension there, even if it's unfulfilled and it never goes anywhere. It can be interesting.
Yeah, and I guess it also like bounces off of the sort of Amos relationship that we don't understand with Naomi at this point.
Yeah, it definitely feels like the show is doing a little better, I guess, more smoother handling of that romantic relationship as it starts to become whatever it will be.
I'm sure you know more than you're saying.
Yeah.
We appreciate you not spoiling us. So I want to talk about Anderson Dawes, because I was really taken with the story he tells about his sister Athena here to Miller. And he tells this because he says something about, he accuses him of killing his sister, and then he tells this story about Athena, who was born with some sort of bone condition, and he did kill her, but he seems to really revere her, and she was kind of a sacrifice to save the rest of his family. And it's clear that he has a lot of pain about it, but then Miller counters of like, well, it's always somebody else who gets sacrificed, never you. And so I just thought this was a really good exchange. Again, I love Jared Harris, and I think he's nailing this character who was not a standout for me in the book, but is really doing a lot here in the show that makes me very compelled by him.
Yeah, I'm going to be interested to see the impact that he has going forward, because clearly he's going to be a huge player with the sort of leading of the OPA. I was surprised when we get to the Julie stuff, I was surprised like he makes an appearance, and it is kind of like, oh man, like what kind of person is he? Because clearly with this story, we're understanding that he's ruthless, and I mean, willing to kill your own sister is pretty wild. And then we see what does he care about? Is it all for the cause, or is there people that he does care about?
Yeah, he's definitely caught my attention much more in the series as well. Yeah, just a really interesting, complicated character, and I would watch him act just forever. I was curious about something that struck me as I was rewatching this. There's a scene, and I can't remember if it was in this episode or earlier, but he talks about the scars on his neck and how they're from like an old spacesuit design or whatever that would leave you burn scars. And all of the Belters have scars on their necks that have that same, or not scars, but tattoos on their necks that have like that same gap. And I was wondering if that's like a subtle world building thing that they're doing.
It's so funny you mentioned that. My wife said the same thing. She has also read, she's read all the books, and she's seen the show. And that was something she pointed out to me in this rewatch, and I was going to bring it up as my next point. That exact observation. That's so cool. Yeah, exactly. I love that they set up like there's these scars from these old helmets, and then they've already shown that all these Belters have the tattoos there, and they leave you to connect the dots and say, oh, okay, so they're getting tattoos to cover up these scars. I think it's brilliant world building, and I definitely really appreciate it.
Yeah, because they never talk about it, and I didn't notice it the first time around. It was just all of a sudden, I was like, wait a second.
I wonder if that's something about a second watch, because I think this is her second watch too, so she was able to pick that out, whereas I definitely didn't like put that together, my first time.
Yeah, that's cool. I had no idea. I didn't even realize that. It's also cool just as a signifier to the audience, like this is a Belter as soon as you see them,
Yeah. Well, and then the idea of like the old spacesuits were so bad that they were leaving scars on your neck. Like they've had to deal with some shit. You know what I mean? Bad equipment, bad living situations. So you kind of feel for the Belters and their cause here.
So I wanted to move on and just talk about Miller and this evidence that he finds, and he brings it to his captain, and she clearly has been bought off and takes it from him and fires him.
Right.
I found it to be effective. I thought it was like, him bringing it to her and the betrayal happening there. I'm sure he wishes that he didn't bring it at this point.
And he looks over and he sees the OPA tattoo on somebody, and he realizes that she's in the pocket of the OPA and there's corruption. And it untethers Miller in a way from his role that he has on series, and I think it makes the character more adrift. And which makes him fascinating. Actually, I continue to be really interested in Miller in the show in a way that I wasn't quite in the book.
I think one thing that's interesting about that is that it's not like the police force was held up to be this really stellar thing ahead of time. It's like her betrayal is a slight more step beyond what he's willing to do, but it's not
right.
It's not like they were sterling silver beforehand, which I just thought that was a really interesting way of portraying that.
It's a cool sort of I almost want to say it's like a grimdark moment, but I don't know if that's really fair. But it's you have this morally gray character who's willing to compromise and he looks at someone else who's like this pure, like his former partner who was like judging him for being kind of corrupt, and he's like, you just don't know the way it is. Yet we see there is a limit, and like you know what I mean. There's like a step too far, and maybe it's only just because of what him caring about Julie Mao and being caught up in the investigation to where this is too far for him. And maybe even shows that like maybe he was wrong and that they shouldn't have been doing this. I don't know. It's an interesting character moment though, because we have not seen this character be this like upstanding anti-corruption cop, like you said. And in fact, they are just like a corrupt security force essentially, right? So it shouldn't be that surprising when this happens, yet we can tell that it is a betrayal to him.
Yeah, it's also interesting to think about the fact that he had hope enough to think that his superior officer would, do the right thing if the evidence was shown there, and clearly he was wrong. So I think Miller's maybe in that moment it's a signifier to us that Miller is more hopeful and he's more of an optimist than he like puts on, and that sort of like hard ass, like, you don't know what I've been through kind of world that he lives in, might just be sort of an act.
You're right. I really like that, the observation that he is more hopeful than he's putting out to the world, I think is really true.
Yeah, he's got a little bit of a heart of gold in there. We get that sense, right? So I do have a few small scenes I want to touch on before we leave this episode. There's a scene where Alex and Amos are in a brothel, and we learn two things. We learn that Alex has a wedding ring that he wears, but Amos says you're not married, and he seems to not push back against that. So we suspect there's more of a story there. Maybe he is divorced, or maybe they're dead. I don't know. But he's wearing the ring still. And then we also learned that Amos grew up in places like this. And so that, I think, starts to tell us more about Amos as a character, which we're going to learn more about him a lot in these next few episodes. And this is where I really started... I mean, he's kind of becoming my favorite character. I really am compelled by him. And I love just sort of the drama he creates with his sort of dead-eyed brutality that he can bring to any scene where he's so unpredictable. You don't know what he's going to do. And I love him and what he's putting on the screen.
I definitely think it's the intention of the filmmakers to make him everyone's favorite, because whether or not you agree with what he's doing, he's so unpredictable and so captivating that you're just like all in for the ride. Like, you're just like, he's the most interesting person on the ship.
Mm-hmm. I felt like all of the ship's crew except for Holden were like, they didn't get hardly any backstory at all in the book. And going through, rereading it again, I'm like, oh right, all of these things that I know about them, I know from the series, I don't know from the books themselves. And so, I mean, especially Amos, he obviously is such a great, captivating character in the series. And then rereading the book, I'm just like, oh my God, he's so cartoony. He's just like got these like cartoony meathead throwaway lines that you're like, oh man, you guys have this great character.
That's a good point. I didn't even think about that. Yeah, I think he really is shining in the show in the way that he doesn't in the book. He is sort of just he's just kind of brutish guy that doesn't have a lot of nuance to him, whereas this show performance does. Yeah, that's a good point. So I have two other scenes I want to talk about briefly. One of them, there's this sequence with this uncle and his son, I think, or his nephew, and they have something where they put something in a net, and then some of it escapes, and they get boarded by a Martian transport or a Martian patrol, and then afterwards he airlocks his nephew into space, and he's like, someone will pick you up, and then it seems like he drives his own ship to blow up the patrol, I assume, in sort of a suicide mission, and then they just leave the guy floating in space, and we're left with this shot of him just sitting like just alone there. And I was just thinking about how like terrifying that would be, and how it's kind of the nightmare of space, is the idea of being just left unable to do anything and just being alone and far from anybody. And I don't know, it was really interesting, and I was kind of surprised they didn't come back to it. I thought that we were going to get some sort of follow-up to that, but at least so far we haven't. What did you guys make of that scene?
Definitely was kind of that world building of like, this is how angry people are getting, that they're willing to, sacrifice themselves to take out this Martian ship. That was, because at first you're like, because he seemed angry at his nephew, and so you're like, oh my god, he's just gonna like throw him out the airlock because he's mad at him. And you're like, oh shit, he's saving him.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I was confused by it until I realized what he was actually doing. So really, the last thing is just that the Tachi, or now the Rocinante, they dress it up like a gas freighter, and they leave the station, Tycho Station.
I did want to point out, Naomi says to Fred Johnson that she has a name for him, and at some point she's going to come to him and she wants him to help her find the person, I guess, or locate this person. And she doesn't say the name, and we don't know who it is, and then it's a dangling thread that we don't get the answer to throughout these episodes. And Jesse, you may know the answer to that, but I didn't know if you maybe had any theories about it, James, because I kind of don't, but I'm curious to know if you did.
Yeah, I don't think I'm supposed to. I think it's like a thread to be left for, and I'm realizing there's a lot of threads in this that they are very clearly just saying like, just wait until we get to this, wait until we get to this. So there's a lot of things being buried here for later. Okay, so episode 7 is called Windmills. Holden and crew realize they're not alone on the Rocinante and find themselves up against a Martian military blockade. Believing all is lost, Miller finds a new reason to forge ahead. Avasarala visits Holden's family in Montana. So they're pinged by this Mars ship right away. And I actually think that this episode was one of my favorites. It's sort of, they're pinged, and then I believe Amos goes below and he finds the stowaway. And then we're led to believe that it's, somebody who's working with Fred, which I don't know if I don't think he is. From what I understand, later on we learn he's working for Earth.
Seems like it, yeah.
Yeah.
Seems like it.
So what'd you guys think of finding that guy?
It was an interesting departure from the book, I thought, and I definitely added more drama.
I agree that this was one of my favorite episodes. I actually really enjoyed this episode. I really liked this, the drama surrounding this hostage. I thought Amos he gave a speech at one point about the churn that I think was one of his best moments in the whole season.
That was cool. Yeah.
It really gave us an insight to how he views the world. And from then on, I kept thinking about that speech whenever he was doing anything. It was like, okay, this is how this guy views the world. It's just kind of like, death is just a thing. It's going to happen to all of us. He's accepted that it's going to happen to him at some point, and he's okay with it. And it's not personal, but like he doesn't mind killing people either because it's all just part of the churn. And if I'm doing it justice, but like it was a cool little speech, and I agree. This was a really good episode.
I feel like the character that they were setting up with the stowaway, he immediately felt like, just the way he was talking and the way he was, we didn't necessarily know that he was undercover, like sort of a spy at first, but the way that he was being set up, I was like, this is an important character. Like I just felt it in my bones that this guy was going to be relevant in some way. And then nearing the end of the season, I thought I was wrong, only to find out that I was right again. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
it comes back and forth.
I wanted to shout that out because I think it's very difficult to have a character like this that isn't like obviously bad or obviously not bad. He really walked that line of like, you didn't know if you could trust him. He kept doing like suspicious things, but you didn't know like to what end he was doing them. Was he just self-preservation, or was it truly nefarious?
Yeah. By the end of the season, it feels to me like it was self-preservation, like trying to do the mission, definitely, but also like self-preservation in there. Because like he'd go to a set, he'd be like, sent to his cell, and like the door would close, and then he'd be like trying to hack their shit, trying to like open up and pull out drives and things like that. So it's like at every turn you're like, what is he doing? And he's got that crazy eye thing. So just
really resourceful character, which is always kind of fascinating in a setting like this.
Now, do you know, I guess it's kind of a spoiler, but I just want to know, do you know if this character like comes back in the books later? Like, is there sort of a character that this is being set up for in the books that you've read about, or is this just like a show only thing as far as you know?
I know that Avasarala does have a spy that she works with, but he shows up in season 2 as a different guy.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think he's show only. I could be wrong about that. I could be misremembering.
Well, it seems like he has a Stranger Things role to play here at the very end of the show.
Right. Well, you also pointed out that James S.A. Corey, Daniel Abraham, and Ty Frank are writers on the show. So, like you said, it kind of is coming from the same source in that sense, right? So even if he is a show-only addition, maybe they're adding him too. So it's kind of... It's all canon, it seems like to me. Like, it's hard to separate the two.
I think so. I think that's one of the things that I really like about this show is that there are a lot of things that are different from the book and, even the order in which they tell events. But it still feels like the exact same story because it's being essentially written by the same people. And so I think that, they told the book in the book form and then they're telling the TV series in the TV series form. And I think this is one of those stories that they do a really good job of telling the story in the right form for what they're doing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's weird to think of a show as taking its time more than the book did. And I just was so, I don't know, it kind of blew me away, that we read half a book and then the first season was basically half a book.
Yeah, it ended up being a really good spot to stop. I was going to mention we kind of lucked out. We thought we were stopping at this really random spot, and we were like, I don't know how this is gonna play when we go over to the show. But it actually ended up being all the way through the final episode before we even got past where we were in the book. Other than a few things here or there that I suspect are still yet to come in the book that we did see in the show. But I did want to shout out another excellent scene, and that was the Avasarala visiting Holden's mom, on that house. And I don't know, it was very dramatic with the red and against the white. But I also really liked, and this is probably stating the obvious, but I really liked that he grew up on a windmill farm. And we know that the Rocinante is named after the horse from Don Quixote, who famously tilts at windmills, right? So I kind of came full circle for me there that, and they don't lay it out. They don't say that that's it. But you can kind of make the connections are there to be made,
Yeah. So I got to say with this kind of showdown with Avasarala and Holden's mom, I felt like when, I still kind of had this sort of weird feeling about Holden in the show. And when we got to this situation, I was like, okay, this is this is going to be their way to start to sell us on this character. And I kind of felt like it was going to be bullshit at first. I was like, oh man, this is not going to work. And it's going to be kind of forced. And then by the end of the conversation they had, I was kind of like, okay, I do like Holden a little more than I did just based on that conversation. I mean, and it had a lot to do with the sort of him being brought up in a world where he was all for the cause, and then come to find out it was a pointless thing that was never going to happen. It was sort of they were trying to save the land, I believe. And he was willing to fight tooth and nail for it, but it was never going to work out. So his mom found a way to kind of channel that and send him off to bigger and better things. I just thought that's a pretty solid backstory for a character like him.
It does kind of set him up as the patron saint of lost causes, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, and I think Avasarala even says at one point that he's got this, he's got a savior complex or something, he wants to save the world. And I like that, and I like what comes later that sort of takes that very noble idea, but then tempers it with his inexperience. And we see, especially when he starts interacting with Miller, we see that he's not the badass that he maybe has been projecting that he is, Mm-hmm. And I thought that actually took the character a long way for me and really differentiated him from some of the other characters that we're seeing. And it's he's not Amos, he's not Miller, mm-hmm. He's not this jaded, hard-boiled character. And in fact, he's really this optimist and he has that savior complex. He wants to save everybody. He wants to do the right thing. He's a very good person, it seems like.
Mm-hmm. And it kind of, I guess this softens the blow for moments where it's a little over the top when he's they're you don't need to be involved in this. And he's like, I'm going to get involved in it. Those moments where he's just he's going to do it because it's for the sake of the story and his character.
Well, and he comes off as naive when he does that, but now it's it's intentionally naive. They're saying that is his character versus it feels worse if you feel like the showrunner are trying to set him up to be a badass who and they don't realize that it's making him sound naive. But this is instead, no, that is just how this guy is. He is naive, and he doesn't really know what he's saying, and he doesn't really know the implications of what's going on.
Yeah.
Right, and I think that's maybe why I liked him better on the rewatch, just that, like, having that in my mind, I was like, oh, okay, well, that's just Holden. Whereas the first time I was like, oh my God.
Yeah. It makes me think about how, like, the show is it's really sucked me in, and it's dug its claws into me at this point. And, like, I'm a fan of the show, and I think, like, even with the things that I don't think are perfect, it seems like they're kind of on the same wavelength as me. So they're like, we know that you're not like super into Holden, but eventually you'll probably like him a lot more. And I just assume that that's how it's going to be going forward.
So I have to share that my wife said, oh, Holden, he's just really extra.
he's pretty extra for sure. I mean, I would say that Miller's also pretty extra. We're going to talk about extra characters.
Fair enough.
So do you guys want to talk about donkey balls?
Oh, yeah, the code. That was a cool sequence, though. I actually thought that was really compelling, but yeah, man.
It was very
That
tense.
was funny. Alex definitely has a bunch of these, like, one-liners, and sometimes they don't land at all for me, but sometimes they do. And sometimes they're funny. This one was pretty funny.
It was funny, like, he said donkey balls like a lot in the episode, like many, many times, and like I felt like each time it was a little less funny. But then at the very end, when he nailed the moment, he read off the code and he was like something donkey balls, and he said it again. I was like, oh my God, all right.
It was like
probably something to do with the rule of threes.
Mendacious. I can't remember the words now.
Ubiquitous. I think ubiquitous. Was
ubiquitous, one. Mendacious, polyglottal. That was the other one.
Nice. Donkey balls.
And then donkey balls. Yeah, pretty good.
It's pretty solid, and I think it's like maybe there's like some sort of like comedy rule of three thing in there, and like eventually it became funny.
He has a delivery that I'm still coming around on. I think he has kind of this. I don't know. It's an interesting delivery of these lines, right? Where it almost sounds like he's like doing an impression of somebody when he says them sometimes. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I could see that.
But it's clearly just who he is. So I think I just need to get used to it.
The last bit of the episode is Miller getting thrown into that airlock and then being saved by his I don't know, ex-lover, I'm assuming, ex-person.
Seems like it, yeah.
And then he basically decides to leave then. And that does kind of roll into the next episode, so unless you guys had something specific, I can start.
Octavia Muss, his like fellow officer and partner, I think they're rolling in like his ex-wife from the book, and also like because Octavia Muss does become his partner at some point in the book, like after Havelock is like leaves. So I think they're just rolling those two characters together, which is why it seems a little confusing in the show.
So we're assuming that she'll show back up then. It seems like.
Yeah.
Or we should assume that, I guess. The reason I said that this rolls into the next episode is we get Miller on the ship talking to the Mormon, which I definitely want to talk about. But let me read this description here of this episode. This episode 8 is called Salvage. The crew of the Rocinante discovers a derelict vessel holding a secret that may destroy humankind. Holden and crew are led to Eros, where they finally cross paths with Miller, only to make a horrifying discovery. On Earth, Avasarala receives devastating news. So yeah, let's jump back to that Miller Mormon conversation. It's kind of faith-based and sort of the journey that they'll be going on. I like this scene. What did you guys think of it?
I liked kind of the questions it raised about like, well, what if you don't find anything? You're just going out, and what if you don't find a habitable planet? And he's like, well, we keep going. That's just what we do. It's
like a purpose.
It shows, and this, I couple this with like the previous episode. I think there was a moment where he's having self-reflection on one of those like trams. And I think it's when he recorded the message to his ex. But it seems like we're getting a very contemplative Miller here who is faced with death, and he's like questioning what he actually believes in and like what his purpose is. And he's chasing after Julie Mao, but it's like I don't even know if he actually believes he's going to be able to save her, but he desperately wants to. And I think when he's talking to this character, I think he's trying to maybe just get a taste of like what it's like to have faith in something like that, and is that something he wants, or I don't know. He seems like a character who's in search of answers for himself, and this was an interesting look at him, and I think over the next few episodes actually is some of my favorite stuff with Miller, and this is kind of the start of that.
It's like you said, he's searching for answers and for himself maybe, but by proxy, as a proxy, he's just looking for Julie, because that's what he knows how to do, is hunt down a case. And so in lieu of anything else, he's going after it.
Well, and if you look at the comparison between a Mormon generation ship potentially going somewhere where there is no habitable planet, but going anyway, him going after Julie to try and save her, yet he knows that it might be too late, yet he's doing it anyway. So there's kind of a parallel there, I think maybe they're trying to make.
There's something that I want to predict about Miller, but I don't know if I should do it yet. But a lot of this stuff that's built up over these few episodes before, well, I guess specifically the last episode and this episode, right into when he meets up with Holden's crew, feels to me like someone who, look, we've been talking about his purpose, and like he feels like, other than finding Julie Mao, like, what is his purpose? It doesn't seem like he can do anything right, and he's kind of like talking shit to himself at one point about how like he thought he was good at investigating at one point, but he really isn't, and all of that sort of thing. And then we'll talk about it in a bit, but like what ultimately happens with Julie, what does that do to his character, and also we'll talk about it more when we get there. So they find the Rocinante finds a stealth ship out on an asteroid at the coordinates that they were sent to by Fred, right, by the Tycho station. And this is kind of the key to all of the scopuli. What we find out is the key to the scopuli, but it's the ship that attacked the Cant. So it's like a lot of threads are being pulled and things are coming together. And then they use this stowaway as like the canary in the coal mine, as Amos says, I think, or something. Which, I mean, works, right? Like that you're going to do that in this sort of situation. You're not going to send your best first. Yeah, no, and it also shows his brutality of like, I don't care about you, I also have a quote from Amos here I wrote down. I'm not even sure where it occurs in the episode, but at some point he says, "Please shut your word hole." And I just love that. yeah, I remember that actually.
Yeah, I think that canary in the coal mine comment, like it also helped develop the spy's character a little bit more, where you're like, oh, I know you're probably not up to any good, but you are kind of likable.
Yeah. He walks that fine line of like, you don't know whether or not you should distrust him, and there was a bunch of times where Amos would have his back to him, and I kept expecting something to happen, but then he wouldn't take advantage of this moment where he had a moment where he could have done something to Amos, it seemed like, but he didn't take that moment to do anything. So it's
I think that's self-preservation too. How would he have gotten home?
Right. Well, push and pull. It's like, okay, maybe I don't know. Like if he was a mustache twirling bad guy, though, he probably would have done something. Like most of the time they do, but he doesn't. It really just seems like he's a smart character who has sort of mixed motivations, and he's just interesting. Like his role here is sort of villainous, yet it doesn't make him a bad guy by definition. Yeah, and he's so outwardly manipulative, right? Like we can see it whenever he's talking to Holden. He's just like, you're not the bad guy. I know you're not a bad guy, and that kind. And he, I think he doubts sort of that Holden has it in him to kill anybody or anything in general. He just seems to be able to read people really well and then manipulate them based on that. And I'm sure that makes him a great spy. Right. So in this ship they find eventually, I think it's really tense. I like a lot of the stuff that happens in the ship, but eventually Holden and Naomi are floating over the reactor, and they start to realize that this black stuff that they see all over it is moving and activating from the radiation and the ship being on, and then they get the hell out of there really quickly and they nuke it. Nuke it from orbit. It's the only way. Yep. All right, it's my favorite Aliens line, or one of my favorites. They and then they immediately leave and go to Eros. Like I was surprised that it happened so fast, but yeah, we immediately shift gears and go straight to Eros, which I wasn't sure if we were going to get the same sort of like big set, big station with a bunch of different locations, but we definitely get it here, and it's actually I was really impressed with it. Yeah, again, they're just like, I think they're really showing that, like, although restrained by a budget, like they went for it with this show. Like it was like the best that they could do. Like the SciFi channel was like, we're gonna make this show everything we can make it, and you can tell from the sets. And honestly, like I was really taken by a lot of the cinematography. There's, I think in the last episode of the season, there's this scene, just visually, the scene that takes place in the arcade, and like the lighting that goes on in there, and sort of like being in that sort of, I love those neon lights, man. It's just great. It just looks so good on camera.
But I'm just noticing that like it's a quality TV show, and I really think that they I haven't seen Battlestar Galactica, but I would assume that this is probably one of the better produced shows ever to be on Sci-Fi.
I agree with that, actually. Although I haven't seen like every show on Sci-Fi Channel, but this leads us to the shootout at this flop house where Miller finally meets the crew of the Rocinante. And I just wanted to weigh, to get your guys' thoughts on this, because it's a very cool moment in the book, very cool moment in the show. We've been waiting for these characters to meet. And what were your thoughts?
I love the moment when like Amos realizes that Miller's on their side and he's like about to shoot him and then pulls up his gun. He's like, nope, don't know who you are, but I know I'm not shooting you.
That was it. I love it. Yeah. So I just feel like there's such a conscious decision to be like, Amos is awesome. Like he's going to hold the gun at him and then he pulls it away, and it's just like that's so much. I don't know. I loved it.
I actually also really like that he doesn't posture. That's something I'm noticing with Amos. Like he doesn't seem interested in posturing with people, because there's a couple times where like somebody says something that's very challenging or very like he gives a command, and then like the camera pans over, because I think we're all wondering like, how's Amos going to react to being told what to do here? And he often just kind of has like a little shrug or something. He's like, whatever. Like he that's why when I mean he's like kind of unpredictable, because you could see him totally bristling, but then he just doesn't. And I think he also kind of recognizes that Miller kind of knows what he's doing, knows how to handle himself, and so he's willing to let him take the lead. For example, when they're going to investigate the room that Julie's in, there's a moment where it seems like is he going to be okay with this? And Amos just kind of shrugs, like, yeah, it's fine.
Yeah, like he's just very confident in himself, like he doesn't need to posture.
Right.
Yeah, and I think we need to mention the fact that the stowaway very clearly betrayed them with this like little eye camera that he has that connected to the internet now that he was on a station somewhere. He's like taking pictures with his eyes, and I think that was a moment where we were like, if he hadn't done that, I think he's a redeemable character that we're like, well, he's just some badass spy that's out there. But clearly he was still going forward with his mission, and it wasn't just self-preservation, so he is kind of a bad guy in our eyes. And then, it needed to be resolved later. Let's talk about the Julie Mao stuff, though, because this was pretty horrific. It was more than I expected to see again on Sci-Fi Channel.
Yeah, there's some real body horror going on here.
Yeah, like the book description was awful, but the visual, I don't know if it was worse, actually, because the book description was pretty terrible.
Yeah, they're both pretty awful. There's just something about seeing it that is very visceral, though, right?
I mean, how brutal is the crystal or whatever you would call it coming out of the mouth? It's just like,
yeah.
The whole thing just makes me cringe, because it's just kind of disgusting. And then, the crystals coming out of your skin. Ooh, that's rough and weird. And then I really thought this was some great performance, a great performance here by Miller, the actor who plays Miller. Well, you know his name, right, James? I've forgotten it now.
Thomas Jane.
Yeah, Thomas Jane. I thought he nailed this. You really see the emotion. You really see how like sad he is that he's failed. He feels like he's failed this woman that he promised to himself that he was going to try and save. And I love that they had to kind of tell him like, don't touch her, because he was going to. You know what I mean? Like he just didn't care in that moment. Mm-hmm. And the pain was very clear on his face.
So the beginning of next episode 9, is called Critical Mass. A flashback to Julie's origin story reveals her trajectory. Holden and Miller finally meet and team up to get to the bottom of the strange emergency situation happening on Eros. As the true horror of the events on Eros is revealed, an ailing Holden and Miller must overcome incredible odds if they hope to live to fight another day. So you were just talking about the Julie stuff, and we immediately get her flashback, which we the show started with, basically. That sort of moment where she sees something within the black ooze and screams and all of that, and her being captured. And we get more of that, and it's intercut a little bit with some of Miller investigating and that kind of thing. And tying these two characters together, I don't know if I mentioned it in the episode or not, but I did feel like this sort of infatuation that he had with Julie was weird, right? Like we were supposed to, as an audience, feel like it was weird, because it was like he was so... I think even in the book it said it was almost like he was in love with her, and it's like he doesn't even know her. How could he be in love with her? And it does seem like they played that through in the show, because he seems devastated, like he knew this person on a very real level, and then it does seem like he loves her kind of, and he keeps seeing her, and although it may be just what she represents to him, just like it did in the book, it's more than you were expecting.
Well, I think like when you see her in the prologue and you like see how kind of badass she is in the prologue, and you want to see more of her, and you get these little glimpses, like I think for the audience it's kind of devastating to see that she's dead, because you're like, I was really hoping this character is going to be part of this, like, you know, join up the ensemble and like be this badass character. But instead, like, she's just kind of a placeholder for everybody's expectations of her. You know, like all of the stuff that Miller puts on her, like, is that, you know, we never get to see her as she truly is. All of the stuff that, like, the guy who Miller interrogates, who clearly was in love with her, like, all of her parents' expectations. So she just kind of becomes this, like, I don't know. I wish we would have gotten to actually see Julie Mao.
Well, and when we did, we had the scene where she was with the Belters, and it was like literally one scene. And in that scene, I feel like there's a lot of character there that like, I agree, it would have been really nice to have explored and seen that character.
Yeah, I was glad for the little bit we did get here because it is more than we got in the book. But yeah, I agree that I think for Miller, it seems like she represents like a chance at salvation or something. Like, I don't know if it's maybe a chance to be a better person or a chance to have meaning to what he's doing. I don't even think he knows what it means to him, but yeah, he's definitely idealizing her and kind of, it's his imagining of what she is. Now, he does get to know her a little bit from like reading all of her diary and like her logs and stuff, or we get more of that in the book, I think. But still, like, he didn't actually know her. I think that Dawes even points out earlier on, he's like, she would hate you. You represent everything she disliked because you're a company man and everything, right? Which I actually think kind of shakes Miller to his core. And I think he's trying to become something maybe she would have liked more. I don't know. It's very mysterious because he doesn't know her. So it's really more self-motivated with just her as like this figurehead or something.
As we can see, she has the best of intentions, and like, she's kind of trying to stick it to Earth as supporting the Belters while also sticking it to her dad. And like, there's a lot that's like baked in there. You know, I feel like she was just starting to come into her own, and she was like, she'd found an organization she believed in, and she was like standing up for people who needed it, and then it's just all snuffed out.
And we see the revelation that her father is sort of behind some of this. We see the doctor, I think named Dresden, who is performing some sort of test on her body, maybe harvesting things, talking about her being a host or something. It was kind of unclear what exactly is going on there. Definitely seems very nefarious, seems tied to all the stuff that's been going on. And it seems like maybe her father is at the sort of the heart of this mysterious force or mysterious group that is causing all this trouble and starting wars.
Yeah, so in Eros station, there's a ship that blows, and it sort of starts a chain reaction that would have all of the citizens rounded up. And well, I guess at first they're trying to escape, and then they're sort of started to be rounded up by a new police force of sorts that we see. Yeah. But also around this time, we're getting Chrisjen, and she goes and visits the ambassador that she had kind of betrayed politically. At one point, he has killed himself because he's dealing with sort of all of his dreams crumbling around him. And so he's killed himself, and she goes to visit his widower, and it's pretty brutal, I would say. Like, she can really feel the devastation of like him being like, you know, he always said that you were so hard to forgive or something like that. And she's like, basically he says he's never going to forgive her. And it's pretty brutal. And she goes to his desk and finds these pencils, which at first we're like, okay, is this a keepsake? At least I thought, was this just a keepsake to remember him by?
But no, she's always got like a secret ulterior thing. Like, even when she's in there, like visiting her grieving friend, like, oh.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm super interested in this character because I'm wondering if she's like a Cersei character, and eventually she's going to be like full on evil, and she's always like, she's got personal interest,
she doesn't seem evil to me in that same way that Cersei is, though.
I agree. That's the other option that I think is more likely, because we do start to see her kind of saying what other people want to hear rather than what we kind of can see morally she would, you know what I mean? She there's the person above her within the UN who says something, and she goes along with it, and we can tell that she's like struggling with it because it's kind of going against her morals, and sort of, I think she ultimately has the greater good of Earth at heart. But right. Interesting nonetheless, because sometimes it doesn't necessarily seem that way. She talks a lot about I just think she's lost a son, and I think she has another son that she's very worried about losing.
Well, and I think she is a power hungry character, it seems like to me. who's positioned herself to where she's at now and is looking to probably climb higher. So I think at the very least, she's maybe sort of a Littlefinger type character.
Yeah, I guess this isn't, maybe it's a spoiler. She's one of my favorite characters in book 2. So I love the actress who plays her, and I think she does such a great job. And I can't remember if you guys said this, but like, I mean, she's an old lady, and I love that. I love that, like, she's this badass old lady who just constantly swears and is, everyone's kind of terrified of her. And it's just so fun to see, like, this older woman, like, at the height of her power, like, being behind the scenes and manipulating everybody. And you're just like, oh, man.
It's really refreshing, right? Like, I love seeing that sort of character. Like, they have that conversation. She and her husband, I'm assuming, have the conversation on the rooftop where she's like, I'm just an old lady. And like, she's like, I'm going to do what's expected of me, which is basically like not fully comprehend what's going on and sort of be outmaneuvered in situations. And yet she's really just biding her time in order to, I'm assuming, take control or something in some way.
I wanted to shout out a moment back on Eros where Holden is sort of questioned, I think, by Naomi and some of the rest of his crew, and it's when he's thinking about going with Miller to investigate what's going on, why people are being rounded up, and they essentially say, like, well, it's not your problem, and he says, well, I'm making it my problem. But he has this moment where he, like, stops for a second, and he's, like, trying to, like, find a way that it could be his problem, and he realizes there is no way, and then he just says, well, I'm making it my problem. And that made me like him. Actually, that was, like, very true to the character they'd set up at this point, right? Like, he just has a savior complex. He wants to save people. And so you kind of got to root for a character like that. Like, he's putting himself out there. That's truly something selfless to do when he could just run in that moment, but he decides he's not going to.
And it leads to the situation that they end up in. Like, they eventually go around and see everybody so my thing is, like, they're being dosed with radiation, but at the same time they're getting hit with the virus or whatever we're calling this thing, this plague, this molecule. Yeah, so everybody's being hit with that, and then they're being hit with radiation because it exacerbates it and makes it grow faster and
like
everything.
Activates it or something, it seems
right.
like.
But there are people who are not in, like, radiation chambers. There's people who are, like, in a train at one point who they, like, open the train, and there's a bunch of people laying on the ground. Those people were just hit, I'm assuming, hit with the molecule and then just left to, like, you know what I mean? They weren't being hit by the radiation as well. So
there might have been a way that they'd rigged up the tram to, like, trap them and then irradiate them as well. I think it's possible. We weren't shown that, but it seems to be the game plan is to do that, right? And yeah, that's where we end this episode, right? With Miller and Holden getting hit with a lethal dose of radiation, we find out, which is quite a cliffhanger to end on.
If I hadn't already read this portion of the story, this first half, and realized that, like, they're clearly going to make it through, this, like, sort of that moment where he's like, we're dead. Like, we just got hit by an insane amount of radiation. And to leave it as a cliffhanger to the last episode, like, that's the definition of a cliffhanger.
I did wonder how he knew that. He didn't have a Geiger counter on him.
Yeah.
Maybe he recognized what that beam was, is the only guess. But, like, you can't feel that, like, as we know from Chernobyl. Like, it's invisible and you can't feel it, and it just fucks you up.
Well, in the book, he knew somehow, because I can't remember exactly how, but, like, he had a device that you're like, oh, okay, that makes sense, or I can't remember what happened, but...
Well, it's like, even if it's like, he could assume if it's something that's common on a station to, like, I don't know, irradiate things, which I don't know why you would do that, but if it's a common thing that's on a station, maybe he's like, oh, that's like too much for us to handle.
He must recognize that beam. That's a radiation beam.
Yeah, I'm sure he can smell it. He can smell the amount of radiation.
Yeah.
I've got one right over there.
Last thing in this episode that I do want to mention is Fred reveals that Earth made the ship. So, like, he's got that little chip, and he's giving this whole speech, and he's broadcasting it to the whole system. I mean, that was his power move, right? That was his moment to basically, like, he's going to leverage that with Holden in order to get a seat with the UN and Mars and everybody and get the OPA's agenda on the board. And he very quickly, and I feel like truthfully, as far as I'm concerned, showed that it was Earth that was behind all these attacks and everything, or at least Earth tech.
Earth tech. I love that every faction is being implicated here, right? Like we've already seen a lot of stuff implicating Mars. Now we're seeing stuff implicating Earth. The OPA seems like this terrorist organization that's probably behind things, and it just shows why everybody distrusts everybody, and there's mounting tension. I think that's a hard thing to set up in a believable way, and kudos to them to be able to do it here, because I do believe this, and it totally makes sense that this would be kind of spiraling out of control like it is.
Yeah. So episode 10 is called Leviathan Wakes. Miller, Holden, and his crew fight their way to the Rocinante to escape Eros. On Earth, Avasarala fears for the stability of Earth's government and her family's safety. So just to start it off, I think one of the first scenes is the scientist kind of talking to some random grunt, and he's just talking about like, you fail your father and this and that, and but he's like taking all of these samples from Julie's body, and just that's how they're dosing everybody, obviously. But who the hell is this guy? Clearly,
his name is Dresden, apparently.
Right, but like, is he working with? He's clearly working with Julie Mao's father. But should we theorize about Julie Mao's father? Is he in line? Because it seems like at the end he's there with some UN people. But is he some sort of like his own faction thing that's working alongside the UN, or is it like he's a part of the UN?
Well, Jesse probably knows the answer to some of these questions, but I'm going to give I think this is clearly like a separate faction from Earth, or maybe the moon, that is working with Earth tech and is trying to make things look like Earth did it, and trying to start wars. I don't know if it's to profit. I don't know if they're going to like profiteer and sell arms or for what reason. But I think clearly this is. We're getting, revealed like who's behind this, at least somewhat here, and it seems like it's Julie Mao's father.
So Holden and Miller, buddy. I guess they're both not cops, but buddy adventure that they go on. I feel like is what the whole first season was building to, with having them separate at first, and eventually they come together, and just the two of them sort of butting heads and their personalities clashing. What do you guys think of this?
I really liked the way that their personalities clashed, and I mean they definitely are setting it up for kind of a conflict of worldviews. Miller's like very kind of similar to Amos' worldview of just like, well, we're all going to die, and this is just the part that we're playing, and this guy's going to die right now because he's in our way. And Holden just be like, oh no, we're going to save everybody if we can.
Definitely.
Yeah, this episode is probably my actual favorite. Extremely good, and really mainly for the Miller Holden stuff. And I think you see Miller's sort of like brutal view of the world, his willingness to kill people, that shocks Holden. It shows very starkly like what Holden is capable of and what he's not capable of. And we see that Miller is a very different person than him. And it challenges him, like it challenges his worldview. Are you willing to kill people to achieve your goals in this way? But at the same time, I like that we're so in a sense it's kind of showing a weakness to Holden's character, but at the same time we're seeing some weaknesses from Miller's character. I love there's a couple of moments where he says like, I have never been anywhere, when he asks him like, how do you know your way around here? And he's like, I've never been anywhere. He's only ever been on Ceres. And you can tell this is because he thinks he's dying. Like you can tell he really regrets that he's never been anywhere and seen anything else. And at one point he even says like, what does rain taste like? How could you ever leave a place like Earth? And you can tell that he's feeling sad that he's never experienced things like that. And so we're seeing some weakness from his character, if you want to call that weakness, but we're seeing some vulnerability from his character, I guess. And the way both of them kind of turn, and then they also have that bonding of like they're dying together. So they're both like going to be more open with each other, and it's going to change the dynamic in a way that you're not going to be if you're not dying. So I just think this is a really cool sort of whole bit with them, even while the other stuff going on with the other characters is also very good. I just really liked that, and then where it leads to the showdown with the
OPA riot thing.
Where Miller kind of incites the riot, which I thought was a really cool moment, because he kind of knows the lingo, and he gets up there and he says, blood is on the wall. There's like a couple lines I actually wrote down because I thought they were really cool. I think that's it. Blood's on the wall. It's time to rise up. He says that a couple times, and it really like stokes everybody and gets everybody going. And I don't know, just really good stuff.
Yeah. And I mentioned before this sort of arcade scene that I really liked, just this like juxtaposition of like happy arcade area with like bright colors, and just
which
in terms
is somewhere
of like,
he grew up, we learn.
and then in terms of like breaking up the grays and the blues and things like that you see on a space station, it's just visually cool. I love that they're hitting themselves with like iodine or whatever they've established was like some sort of medicine for this sort of massive amount of radiation.
I thought it was some sort of like focus upper thing that was like keeping them moving, even though I didn't think it was actually helping with the radiation at all. It was just like keeping them going. It was some sort of adrenaline or something. They probably said what it was, and maybe I just missed it.
I think they did. And then the other thing I wanted to talk about was with Miller. This goes back to my theory thing that I felt like was being set up from basically episode 6 on. Is Miller dead or what? Like it's just like they're really leaning into the fact that he doesn't have a purpose anymore with Julie Mao. Like all the failure of the Julie Mao and not having found her, but having it be like a poor outcome for him. He seems to have taken a higher dose of radiation than Holden. I noticed that Holden like moved out of the room a little faster. So they're trying to say that he got hit with like a lethal dose because he's like puking blood and stuff. Whereas like I didn't see Holden doing that as much. He's just like overall like he just seems like he's lost his will to live. He's talking about like Earth, just like the Mars guy did. The Mars guy was talking about like what was Earth like before he died. Remember the Mars sort of commander that they had on their ship? He was like, "Oh, Earth, how could you ever leave it? And what was it like? And all that kind of thing." And now Miller's like, "Rain and this and that." It just seems like is this guy gonna fucking die like first episode of season 2? I don't think that he
tell
will.
us, Jesse.
Yeah.
He's acting like he wants to know, but he doesn't want to know.
Yeah, don't tell me. I'm theorizing because
Secret
it seems
safe with me.
I don't think that they kill him. I think that there's like just too much that is on. Hasn't been kind of shown yet, but it seems like he's on his way to dying. But also in the book, didn't they both get on the ship and then get saved immediately?
I don't know that we got that far.
In the book, I thought
you might have read one more chapter than me, though. I don't know.
I think I did, yeah. So spoilers.
So yeah, happens. I don't know. But I think what they're doing here, and I could be completely wrong, but I think they are breaking him down to like, you know, the barest bones. He's being broken. He's losing everything he thought he knew. And I'm going to be really curious to see where they build him back up now, because I think that's going to be the arc for him is finding new purpose, finding a new will to live and a new reason to go on and a new mission, because he clearly needs something. Is it going to be vengeance? I don't know. But I'm fascinated to see what they do with Miller, because it does feel like this is a character who sort of lost everything and could be destined for death. But I think we're instead going to see the phoenix rise from the ashes, and we're going to see some new version of Miller going forward. I hope.
No comment, right, Jesse?
No comments.
So we get the Holden showdown with the stowaway who's still on this, and he's trying to
Hanzo. I actually have his name here, I think, or at least they call him Hanzo at one point.
Hanzo, you said?
Kenzo is what the...
Kenzo? Is that what it is? Maybe I misheard it. Okay, sorry. Kenzo.
I've got the Wikipedia page pulled up, and that's what it's saying.
All right, fair enough.
He is again trying to manipulate Holden, but Holden has kind of been muddied by Miller. Like the influences of each other are kind of rubbing off. I can already see like Miller and Holden are rubbing off on each other. Now Holden seems like he's capable of killing someone after going around Eros and trying to survive with Miller, and he just seems like he learned something about how naive he was.
They're rubbing off on each other a little bit, maybe.
So then he has the showdown with him. He fires a bunch of shots. Miller's there, sees it, and they kind of stumble to get to this. Oh, sorry. Then the riot happens, and then after the riot,
that's fine.
They stumble to this elevator, and they're both basically dying and just talking to each other. And then Amos shows up, but first it's Julie Mao.
Before that, we got to talk about they're getting ready to go up, and then he stops the door, and he's like, "Hey, so and so." He calls his name. "Come here."
Oh yeah,
it's the guy he recognizes from station, and he calls him over to get him on the elevator, and he just shoots him in the head, and then he's like, "Oh yeah, he deserves it. Believe me." I thought that was a really interesting moment for Miller there. Just it's like he didn't need to do that. That guy was going to die anyway.
Well, I think that
he clearly wanted to.
I might be wrong with this, but I thought that he said he clearly deserves it I need to go back and check, but I thought that this was the guy who like pinned Havelock to the wall.
Oh no, it is. Yeah,
Okay,
it is.
yeah.
That's him. Yeah.
So yeah, he did deserve it then, right?
He did.
At
But he
least
could have
in our
left
eyes.
him. He was going to
Yeah.
die. Like, that's the implication. But
Yeah.
he was like, I'm going to kill this guy personally.
Yeah.
Which I think tells us something about the way Miller views the world, right?
Well, I wanted to say something about the Holden shooting at the spy, because in any other episode, I wouldn't have believed that he would actually kill him, and he doesn't in this episode, but I didn't know, watching this, I was like, he might actually kill him. He's like
Right.
Yeah.
at that point and been hanging out with Miller too long.
Yeah, he's been
Exactly.
seeing Miller execute guys left and right. And he kind of does, it is a death sentence. So in a way, it is sort of, telling him he's going to die. So
But he's not able to pull the trigger.
exactly, he's not quite there. He can't quite be like Amos
Yeah.
or Miller. And it's good to not have three characters who are all stone cold killers, I think. Like, it's good to have a different kind of character, and provide that comparison.
Yeah, my question is, have they set up a character now who now it's obvious though, like now we're looking for the moment that Holden actually kills someone.
Yeah,
and it's
or
going to be either a big
maybe.
moment, or does he ever kill anyone ever? I don't know. Now
I
it's
don't
become it's a big deal.
It depends on what they're playing at, what kind of story they want to tell. And yeah, I'm curious to see where it goes. I'd say if we're talking about a classic grimdark story, then it would tend to be that, like, kind of sort of the corruption of innocence, and eventually everybody gets worse and more murderous. But maybe that's not where they're going here. I don't know. So I'm curious to see where that goes too.
So basically, the last few things here are Naomi in the tunnels. They meet up with some people. They save a couple of people at the last minute. She's kind of navigating the tunnels, and I think it's basically clear now that she's OPA because she's understanding all this stuff about the tunnels.
She may have been
was.
OPA previously. Yeah.
And then we get Miller and Holden with the elevator, like I was just talking about. They are found, like Amos finds them, but at first Miller sees him as Julie Mao, and then it like has a great transition, like just like a matching cut, and then it cuts to Amos, and he's like, "You guys look like shit."
Yeah.
And
God, there's a couple of great Amos moments here. I really liked so there's also Miller's former friend or guy he knows on Eros who's with the group, and then they meet this other group, and the guy gets infected, and then later on he's just not there anymore, and they go, "Where's that scruffy guy?" And it's like, "Oh, we're better off. We left him behind." Right. And then they look to Amos, and again, in a moment that I didn't expect from him, he's like, "We're better off." Like, he just agrees.
Yeah, I mean, he's not wrong. They probably are better off.
Yeah, but it's like he can be super brutal, but then like you just don't know what he's gonna say. I don't know. I really like that about him.
So they've all met on the ship at this point. Miller sees that Amos killed his friend, which is, I'm assuming, going to be a point of contention later.
Well, we got to talk about that, because that was a really, I don't know, amazing moment, I thought, because they had set up Amos to be agreeing with this guy. Like, yeah, we're kind of on the same page. Was that Amos playing him? I don't know. Or was he really on the same page up until that point? Because he pulls a gun on Naomi, and Amos doesn't almost doesn't have any reaction at all.
Until
but that,
he does.
I think, is just being like playing poker. And then, yeah, he like tells him, "Go do this thing," because he thinks he's fully on his side, and then just executes him. Really, really crazy scene, but good one.
Yeah, I mean, Amos was almost on his side the entire time until he pulled a gun on Naomi, and then he was like, "Nope, you're dead."
Yeah, but he didn't display that in his face at all. Like, completely stone. Like, it looked like he didn't care. And I think even Naomi didn't know. If she was like looking at him like, are you going to do anything about this? And he was just like, I'm not. And she kind of was, I think, doubting, because their relationship's been a little rocky of late. So I think it kind of makes sense that she would be unsure. And it just shows that, like, even she doesn't know what he's really capable of, and that backs up the thing they said earlier, where it's like, maybe she's a little bit afraid of him. Whereas I hadn't seen that before, but the more I get to know him, the more I can see that and see like why she might actually be a little afraid of him.
And great moment for the audience too. Like for us, it's like it's very clearly such a dramatic and awesome moment, because we are along the ride with Naomi. We're like, oh shit, Amos is on his side, and then bang, execute. I mean, and then basically from there, it's just the everybody's on the ship, and they are clamped in still, and Alex, just like, he's like, to hell with all this, and he drops all the gas stuff. And like I said before, that's kind of a badass moment where they're like, this is us, this is the end of season 1, looking forward to season 2, and then they fly off.
Looking forward to season 2. That was the final line he said.
Yeah. I remember when Alex said that. He's like, to hell with this. Looking forward to season 2.
Well, and then there's the very final moment of the spy and getting eaten by the protomolecule, or that starts mimicking him.
What was
and you're
that?
just like, what is happening?
It's like there's like a hologram version of him that's like teleporting around him, and like then the crazy arm comes down. Like you said, kind of Stranger Things. Although I guess this predates it. But yeah, and then I'm like, is that the Leviathan that's waking? Is it this? Have they created a like monster on Eros now? Is Eros like a living organism, going to be connected all these different bodies? And I don't know, like something crazy is happening.
Yeah, my theory is we talked about the book and like sort of the genesis of this idea. They had aliens in mind. I think we're going to get some sort of like whatever molecule, human hybrid, like humanoid sentient creatures from this maybe. And they're also...
But I mean, we have no idea why. Like, why is he doing this? Right?
Right, yeah. You mean the molecule or the guy?
The guy. Like, if Julie Mao's father is behind all this, and he's deliberately creating this situation on Eros...
No, I don't think that was an intention. I don't think that was intentional. I think it's just a byproduct. No, I think
I thought he knew this was going to happen.
No. I think he meant to create like a bioweapon, but I don't think that he predicted that it would become sentient and like do this weird shit at the end, like become.
So maybe it's like out of his control.
I think that's probably what we're looking
Once again,
at.
Jesse probably knows exactly the answers to these, but we'll have you hold them. I did want to talk about another like sort of quieter moment, but another I think very interesting one is there's two that are pretty striking. Miller looking at his dead friend, and Amos saying, "I shot him." No explanation as to why. Very Amos moment. It's just like, yeah, I shot him. And then, so we don't know how Miller's going to react to that, right? Like, how's he going to feel about that? And then Naomi and Holden have this moment where they're like actually holding hands, and that really seems like the strongest emotional connection, sort of romantic, possibilities forming. And potentially, and it looks like both characters recognize it in the moment. Like, this seems like they recognize that they feel something for each other. So the question then becomes, next season, are they going to follow through with any of that, or are they going to like back away and say like, we can't do this? Or so, in that sense, I think it's also an interest for next season of like, where's this going, and makes me want to watch the next season.
Yeah, a lot of dangling threads. I think I'm not that interested in their love story if there's going to be one. I guess there's like tension to be had there for sure.
You're not feeling it, sounds like.
I'm not feeling it. The Miller stuff, I'm like the Miller like having his best friend killed.
Does he have a cold black heart? I thought I had the cold black heart on the show, but maybe it's you right now. Not in it for the romance, huh?
Not in this case. I just felt like I was interested in the character of Naomi as like standing up and like not I don't know what
you don't want her to be a love interest. You want it to be something.
I don't like the idea. Yeah, I don't like the idea of these characters being put through that as well. But again, it's like I think that's what makes this story potentially engaging for other people, because there are people who will like that, and there are people who will engage with a love triangle situation that might be going on with Amos. And I don't know that this is necessarily love with Naomi and him as much as like it could create tension with him and Amos, or with Naomi and Amos if anything does happen with Holden and Naomi. But I don't know. Just
it doesn't seem like romantic to me between her and Amos. It seems more like almost brotherly or something else, some sort of protective thing, but not romantic. I don't know. I mean, it's hard because I want you to weigh in, Jesse, but I feel like you also know a lot about what's going to happen in the future. But maybe just in general at this moment, as a snapshot, what do you think of this this relationship? Does it feel like that it's appropriate for this point in the story? Do you like it, or do you not?
I think I would say it feels like it's convenient that there's a woman on the crew and has sort of feelings for the captain and vice versa. And so for me, I'm just like, well, can't we just have a story that doesn't have that involved in it? It feels a little bit more like, hey, we're two people. You're kind of hot, I'm kind of hot, than it does have any sort of substance to it.
Well, I guess I'm going to be the one who, I don't know, I was kind of feeling it, And I agree, because I think that, I mean, I like Alex as a character, but I kind of think that maybe having one more woman in the crew who is not romantically involved with anyone could have helped alleviate some of this problem. Like you said, she's the only woman. So that creates sort of this issue. But still, I think she can be a really interesting, dynamic character who, has a really important role to play beside any romantic connection. Yet there still could be this romantic thing going on between her and Holden that could be interesting, and it could be realistic too, right? Like, the people we fall in love with and the people we like are the people we're around. And, you know what I mean, ultimately, and they're around each other, and they've gone through a lot of shit together, and they're both good-looking people, and they're both single, and it's like, it could happen, and probably would happen.
I just think she's way too cool for Holden's pout.
She's too cool.
Yeah.
So who do you ship her with instead? That's the real question.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Or maybe Miller and Holden. That should be the ship.
Oh, I'm sure that it's being shipped. Yeah.
They could really learn a lot from each other. All right.
Yeah, I mean, overall, I'm sold on the show. Like, as we talked about before, I want to continue watching the show. I'm excited for next week when we're going to talk about the book. Did you guys have any other general stuff that you wanted to finish up with?
Just one more thought about the romance. I know we've hit it a lot here, but I think the reason that I am more pro this romance
is you wear your heart on your sleeve, and you're a hopeless romantic.
I'm a bleeding heart, yeah. No, I think in the show they've done a lot more work to set up these characters having a relationship, whereas I think in the book, I'm with you. It felt tacked on, it felt unnecessary, and it felt weird. Here, I felt like they've been doing the work over the previous episodes of setting up their relationship and how much they rely on each other and respect each other. And in that sense, to me, it feels like a more organic thing to develop between the two of them. But it's weird because you do have to separate yourself from book and show. And that can be kind of difficult to do sometimes. Because I agree that in the book, it feels pointless. It feels like, why are they doing this? So
I don't know. I agree. Like, I definitely think that they're doing the groundwork for it. But for myself personally, I just felt like a scene that has any sort of like romance between Naomi and Holden is much less interesting to me than when she was like at odds with Holden. But that's just like, I don't know.
Sure.
It's just probably personal preference.
I kind of think that we're going to see much more of that. I don't know that this is actually going to go anywhere. I could be wrong, but we will just have to find out. But Jesse, do you have any final thoughts you want to give on The Expanse, the TV show? You're going to come back next week. We should announce. So you're going to join us next week for the book to talk about that. But for the TV show, what are your final thoughts on it?
I am super excited to get my husband home from his travels so that we can finish watching season 3 and start on season 4.
Is it one of your favorite shows? Would you say that?
Yeah, I would definitely put it up there.
Okay. So it sounds like you maybe do have some reservations where it's not just like unabashedly love everything about it.
Yeah, I guess I would say like there's times when it feels maybe like it's a little slow or cheesy, and we would have binged through the end of season 3. Like, I'm not sure why we didn't. I can't remember what knocked us out of it, because it was scheduled for sure, but it's like when you put a book down halfway through and you never remember to come back to it. Like, why didn't we remember to come back to it?
Yeah, it kind of says something, right?
Yeah, but I do really enjoy it.
I think at the end of the day, like, it's like there's not a ton of like solid sci-fi shows. I mean, there definitely are a good like 10 fingers of sci-fi shows on TV, I'm sure, that are very good. But I would say it's probably in that top 10 of like sci-fi shows out there right now. Whether it's the perfect sci-fi show for you or not, it's definitely like one of the better ones out there right now. And I think it's a very like, I mean, it's space opera. It's a big sci-fi show that is wearing it on its sleeve. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's hard to compare it to some other types of sci-fi that aren't dealing with spaceships and space stations and gravity and all this stuff. Mm-hmm. So this isn't a one-to-one comparison, but I was thinking a lot about, because you mentioned like what you asked me in like, I think our first one, like what space opera books I've read. And I was realizing that like I probably haven't read all that many space opera books specifically, but like the story is familiar to me, a space opera story from movies and other things. But this show makes me think a lot of And I mentioned Dead Space at one point, and there's a little bit of that. But really, what it makes me think of is like a smaller version of Mass Effect. If you've ever played Mass Effect, it's very Mass Effect to me. That's my comparison.
I can see that. Well, we want to thank Jessie for joining us. She will be back next week, but go ahead and let people know where they can find you, where they can find your books, where they can find you on Twitter, so on and so forth.
Well, you can find me at jessiekwak.com. That's JESSIEKWAK. And that's kind of my hub for everything I do. You'll find all my books there, etc. I'm at jquak on Twitter and Quack Jessie on Instagram. Those are probably the two places that I hang out the most. I'm also the first 10 pages of Google results for my name. So if you if you can't remember any of those, just Google Jessie Kwak and you'll find me.
Now, I was on your website earlier, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you have like a free sample up, right? Like if people want to just check out your series, is it the start of the series or is it a standalone? I wasn't sure.
Yeah, I've got a novella that's available for free that's set in the world that my main series is in, but it's not a necessary read before you jump into the first book.
Awesome. So if people want to check it out, that'd be a good way to kind of dip their toes in, see if they want to buy.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you again next week.
All right. Thanks, guys.
All right. So this week we want to thank Christina C. for being a patron. We really appreciate your support. You help keep this podcast going. And all of our patrons, we want to thank you for supporting us. If you'd like to find out how to become a patron yourself, go to patreon.com/thinktofilm. You can find all of the bonus content we have available on there, including a recent bonus episode we did where we talked about some Game of Thrones commentary that got leaked. And we also talked about a short story by Neil Gaiman that was a retelling of the Snow White story. So it was a fun episode to record, and we hope you go check that out.
Yeah, thank you to all our patrons. Connect with us on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, all of those at @InkToFilm. And please join our Council of Inklings, because that's where we post polls, we post any sort of adaptation news that we see, and we just kind of keep the conversation going over there.
And that is on Facebook, in case that wasn't clear. And if you wanted to, you can also join we have like a Goodreads book club that we don't talk about a ton, but there is actually a pretty good number of people in there, and sometimes we get some discussion going on the forums there. So if you're on Goodreads, definitely come check that out. Just search groups for Ink to Film Book Club and you'll find it. And we also wanted to thank Ross Bugden for the use of our intro and outro music.
And thank you to Jennifer Delazana for providing our transcripts. And once again, thank you to Jessie for coming on, and we're looking forward to next week.
Absolutely. We will see you guys next week for the second half of Leviathan Wakes. But until next time,
thanks for listening.